So, science is based on trust and authority. Without those, science becomes a perversion of itself. Let's see who our audience is here today. Who reads CNN, New York Times, Fox News, even Instagram or Facebook? We're exposed to conflicting messages through articles every day. One day they tell us that coffee prevents cancer, the next day it's actually the cause. My exposure to questionable headlines like this one urged me to learn about how data analysis works and what the flaws are in the system. My father, who's a physicist by major, always tries to teach me to think like a scientist, critically and logically. And especially when it comes to health articles. And unlike politics, religion, and sports, this is the one thing we never argue about. While spiritual and moral matters are more subjective, targeting the question of what's right and wrong, with science, it gets a little easier, as science is there to build our knowledge about how the world works. And it's not open up to interpretation. There's only one right answer to any given question. We're all aware how scientific method works. Scientists, they notice phenomena, they try to explain it, they make an investigation and come up with the results and make a conclusion by redefining their hypothesis. So why is this step to analyze the data given is so hard for us to comprehend? I interviewed Dr. Calaberti. He is the executive director of the Association for Science in Autistic Treatment, and he has told me about a case study by Andrew Wakefield. Back in 1998, he published his Lancet paper, which is a peer-reviewed, very well-respected journal, and he falsely claimed that there is a correlation between MMR vaccines and the rise of people suffering from autism and the vaccines given to them. So what he did, he basically just collected 12 children who were pre-selected, the keyword being there, pre-selected, for their bowel and behavioral issues, which could potentially be linked to autism. And his conclusion was that the vaccines increase the risk of autism. Sounds legitimate, does it not? Well, let's rethink that. What this means is he just takes 12 children already suffering from those symptoms, he investigates them for a week. Parents of 8 of those say that they were all developing normally up until the point where they had their first shot. And the whole paper is pretty much a collection of stories from those parents, which is similar to those in fictional novels. After reading this paper, it's clear to see how he could think that it was linked. However, we know that the research is only based on 12 children, sought by their symptoms. The target group was already biased, not to mention anything about their tiny sample. There was no control group, so it didn't take into account some people who were given a MMR shot and some who were not, which would make it a more reliable experiment. Wakefield's infamy arises from the fact that he decides to investigate his patients who were pre-selected for their symptoms. Which brings me to my next point, that correlation does not necessarily imply causation. And we, as humans, we love to make stuff up. This is how we make sense of the world, and I myself am guilty of this, and so are you. I mean, I overthink the punctuations in my friend's text, and when I see 3 black cars in the same line in the road, I get a little nervous. And one is able to tell whether a child has developed autism around the same time when vaccinations happen, and this is why it's so easy for parents to blame it on vaccinations. And even though Wakefield's research was discredited, it still causes the public crisis that we still have to this day. And this is just bad science, yet it's made its way into newspaper headlines and caused thousands of families to leave their children unvaccinated, which causes an epidemic even today, like the one in New York, with reported more than 800 cases of measles. And the impact of poorly conducted studies like this, which somehow gain momentum from newspapers, is the loss of public trust in science, which could be exemplified in the issue of our distrust when it comes to climate scientists who predict certain issues about global warming. All scientists, they have a responsibility They need to make sure that data is collected, analyzed, and reported, and explained, and all the findings are explained in the best manner possible. Because when it comes to science, a simple mistake could not only cost hundreds of thousands of lives, but it could hurt the cause of science. So let's get back the images from earlier. On first glance, these two contradict each other. However, the real problem is not that the data necessarily rejects each other, but rather our ignorance when it comes to asking the question. So Daily Mail, they were right. As in, alcohol does reduce heart risk because it raises the good cholesterol level and therefore decreases your blood pressure. However, in large quantities, it can lead to cirrhosis, which is a liver disease, so it is hazardous to us as well. Another example of false result due to improper formation of the question can be found in Daily Telegram. Doctors say no to abortion in their surgeries. And they claim that 4 out of 5 doctors, they do not want to carry out terminations, even though the idea is being tested in NHS. So, what does this actually mean? What do they mean by abortions? Do they mean the surgical operation or the oral pill? Well, you would think, how could such data even be gathered in the first place? Would the person who conducted this article come up door to door asking doctors their honest and biased opinion about this? Well, it actually starts in the doctor's chat site. And the question was, doctors should carry out abortions in their surgeries. And these were the options they were given. Now, what does should mean in this sentence? Should as in, is it morally safe? Is it a moral thing to do, or is it safe? And like what kind of determination are we talking about? And so we know that without a correctly given question, there is no way to gather correct information. The media gets into our heads with the catchy headlines and that more often than not have nothing to do with science. As we have explored earlier, the bias-driven errors in research are having a tiny sample, not having a randomized sample, seeing patterns where there are none, and incorrectly formulating the question. So what I want you to do is, when you take a look at the next newspaper article, I want you to question it. I want you to think, who is doing the study? Is it causation or correlation? What other biases may be present? Because without proper safeguards, accuracy of science cannot be assured. And accurate science is a necessity in the modern world to keep both trust of public and to avoid disastrous results.